welcome to This Dementia Life, created by Dementia Action Alliance. Our website is danow.org. I am proud to be your host, Chuck McClatchy, and I live my dementia life with Alzheimer's disease. During this Dementia Life podcast, we have conversation with inspiring people living with dementia and the amazing people that care about us. My guest today, and I'm so honored to have her here, is Kathy Laurenhue. She's an author, she's a CEO, and in her spare time, she is the chairman of our DA Arts Group. Hi, Kathy, and thank you so much for being on today. Can you tell us a little bit of, about yourself and where your passion comes from for helping people with dementia?
Thank you, Chuck. I'm delighted to do this. I'm honored to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation because I'm so passionate about the arts, particularly with working with people living with dementia. I got into this because my mother had Alzheimer's disease, or at least we think it was that. This is a very long time ago. And about 30 years ago, she was in a car accident with my father and had further brain damage at that point. She lived another 6 years after that, but she rarely spoke again. And in the aftermath of the accident, she had 12 broken bones. So she had to go into a nursing home during that time, and while the bones were healing. And the people in the nursing home meant well. They were kind in their demeanor and in what they intended to do with others. But the reality is they had no idea what to do with somebody who was living with dementia. So they weren't exactly effective at what they were doing. And my background is instructional technology. So in instructional technology, we learned that you get a SME, you have a subject matter expert, and with that, you can train anybody to do anything in any media, in quotes at least, theoretically. And so I found a woman whose philosophy about dementia care was similar to mine, about it being compassionate care, but also in being informed about who the individual was so that you could care for the person, not the disease. And from there, I started a newsletter with her, her advising me about what I was writing, because writing is really my background. And from there, I started doing my own workshops and teaching, and worked in the field for many years. But as I was developing myself in those years in that direction, I also realized the caregivers, and in those days we called them only caregivers, but both professional and family caregivers, they were also highly stressed and their brains were turning to mush. At least that's how they felt. And they needed some stress relief as well. So I had been focused on what I always call myself as a lighthearted, practical person. So I would write about dementia and cover tough subjects, but I tried to do it in a lighthearted way. So yes, it's a terrible disease, but if you don't keep your sense of humor, you will never survive. And we say this all the time, that I wouldn't have ever survived without my sense of humor, or my friend who helped me get my sense of humor. But we still think of sense of humor as being fluff. So I tried to take that serious disease and make it lighthearted. So when I talked about continence care, I said we can't be anal about this. And I just tried to be lighthearted in anything that I approached, and got a reputation for doing that. And so over the years, I realized that part of what I wanted to do then was get a lighthearted approach also in how we engaged people, so that when I started out, it was all about bees on a wire, children's toys that they gave to people living with dementia. And I thought that's very demeaning. That's not useful. And I wanted to do something that was more appropriate for their age and for their knowledge, because the knowledge doesn't all go away. A lot of memories go away, but not all the knowledge. And so I started doing trivia quizzes and word games and things like that, but I made them so that they could be used as often as possible with people who are living with dementia, but also with the people who were caring for those people. So that's really how my journey transcended. And about 2 years ago, Karen Love got me involved with dementia and the arts, which was always a subcategory of things that I was interested in, because I love the arts and I love what they what creativity does for people. And I love the fact that one of the things that is not a loss in Alzheimer's disease is creativity. That part of the brain is less affected. And you can still do a lot of things with creativity when you have dementia. And so I call that the joy of dementia, is that you still have access to creativity in many, many ways.
I like that you said that, the joy, because too many people look at this disease and automatically it's doom and gloom. There's nothing left. Why go on? And to let people know that there is a whole life out there for all of us. And I love that you use humor, because to me, I couldn't get by without humor. I have to laugh at some of the things I do. And, Bobby is able to laugh at some of the things I do. And it kind of takes that fear, not understanding, kind of takes it away. Why don't you go and tell us a little bit about the DAA Arts Group and all the people that are there, and what you guys are doing.
My pleasure. This is what I really want to do. So the joy of dementia through the arts. This is a little slide presentation that I put together to show you a little bit about it. You can see that the person who made this drawing is very joyful. I love the colors in it, and it's about a bridge in fall. The person who really got the whole gamut of things going in terms of art and people living with dementia was a woman named Sully Jenny, who wrote this book called Memories in the Making. And she started this program of Memories in the Making, in which it wasn't just about taking people to a room and coloring. It was about having art classes and letting people have some free reign, but giving them some adult materials and seeing what they did with it. And I love her work, but she died, unfortunately, a few years after she started this program. And it was taken over by Ladoris, who was known as Sam Heinley. And she also wrote a book about this, which is also, she actually wrote 2 books. They're also very good. Unfortunately, she has since died as well, but the program continues. And what I loved about Sully Jenny is she would point out little things like people would draw a face and put all these other colors in, but they would also draw little faces within it, and a lot of circles. Circles were a very big thing for people with dementia. So she would point out things that were very common in the art, which made us have another appreciation of it. One of the things was repetition in art, that people would do the same thing over and over again. And this particular painting is from the book by Sam Heinley, and she said that the person who drew this, Ellen, said, "I'm ecstatic. Is ecstatic a big enough word to tell people how I feel?" So she loved doing this painting, and doing the same thing over and over again made her very happy. Another thing that people tend to think is that people are going to do doom and gloom kinds of paintings, the same as they think doom and gloom is associated with dementia in general. And in fact, people over and over again draw objects of nature. So they will draw trees and flowers and birds and their pets. A lot of times they're pets. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. So here, for example, are just birds drawn by a variety of people with a variety of abilities. But all of these people are living with dementia drawing these birds. And they all share this theme of loving the outdoors, which is a reminder that we don't get outdoors enough. And certainly in residential care settings, we don't get people outdoors enough. So it also reinforces that point for me. Other times people draw things that are not particularly recognizable. This is a place I've never been by Irene. And it's sort of abstract. And yet she was very clear about wanting to get something across that was sort of a landscape, and obviously pretty colors, and it might not be totally representational, but it does represent a certain amount of joy in doing that. Then we get to Mike Belleville, whom you have already interviewed, and his painting, his watercolor painting of a giraffe that he did for his 8-year-old granddaughter. Mike Belleville had been a drawer all his life, he said, but he'd never picked up a paintbrush ever until after his diagnosis. And then one day he discovered that he really liked watercolors, and that's been his main medium ever since then. And he does a lot of portraits and other things, so more serious art, but he has a great deal of fun drawing the fun kinds of art, and is delighted to have found a whole new voice through art, which is what people tell me over and over again, is I now have a new voice. And that's really important, especially as you lose your ability to speak. So I'm delighted with this particular photo. Other people were artists before and they're artists again. So this is a picture of Dinah by Minna Packer, who's also a member of our arts group. And obviously she has a great deal of talent. She has deteriorated a lot in terms of her dementia over the last couple of years, and is very disturbed by that, so that things in daily life she can't handle, but she can still do this beautiful artwork, which is absolutely amazing to me. And she talks about it just as that ability to have a voice to do that. She uses people in her own life to reflect her own life experiences, and I know they will all treasure this as time goes on. But we also have an artist in our group who is a potter, and that's Susan Bachman, who does absolutely beautiful pottery. Again, she had a completely different career before she had early onset dementia, or young onset, and she found that pottery was a thing that she loves, the fact that she uses her hands for it, and she gets completely lost in it, and time just flows for her when she's doing pottery, and she does absolutely tremendous work. So she discovered a whole new talent after her diagnosis. Another way that you can express art is through art appreciation. And the High Museum in Atlanta has a program called Musing Together. One of the docents is Esther Smith, who is also on our arts work group, and their program is absolutely wonderful, in which they take usually just 2 or 3 paintings or pieces of artwork in each session, and they get together and they talk about them and they learn about the art, but they also recognize that they can still appreciate art even if they can't draw it. So there's a lot of these programs around the country. It's a beautiful program. At the end, I will give you the contact information if you'd like to learn more. Then we have a horticultural therapist, Leslie Fleming, and she just is so creative in the ways that she helps people living with dementia express art through gardening. Gardening is a hugely satisfying thing for so many people. So many of our committee members do gardening. They don't think of themselves as horticultural therapists, and they don't have that particular training, but they gain a lot of satisfaction from that aspect, working in nature. And speaking of that, not everybody can get out in nature. So Nicole Root has this product she calls Tray Play, in which she brings elements of nature in and then gives people a chance to arrange them on a tray. And they're just beautifully creative kinds of things. Here's another example of the elements that she will give to people and then just let them arrange it as they choose. She gives them one piece at a time, and they just add and add to the diorama that they create. So another way that you can use art in your materials. Donna Newton-Bluestein is another of our committee members, and she is a dance therapist. Here she's working with a group of older people standing. And here she invented Octoband so that everybody can work together, but stretch out with these Octoband things. She works mostly now with people who are in late stage dementia, so they're not necessarily able to do any of these kinds of standing things, but she still does wonderful work with them. That dance movement is something that we need all our lives, and that feels good all of our lives. Then we have one writer living with dementia on our work group. We have other writers who write about Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. That's Teresa Montgomery, and she has a weekly blog, a daily blog that she sends out, and she calls it I Smile, which stands for Share My Individual Life Experience. And she wants to be a living example to others that they maybe or may have heard the words incurable. That does not mean we live with fear or carefully. Instead, we live with boldness, keeping busy and adventurously. How else would we be able to stumble into a cure or a miracle? Never rule that out. So then there's Danny Klein Modisette, who has Laughter on Call. And humor, as we've talked about, is so important when you have dementia. And I love what she's doing with them. She takes comedians, people who do stand up and other or work in the theater, but people who have this background. And most of them are not working during the day. They work at night. So during the day, they come into nursing homes and assisted living communities and work one-on-one with people. See, they also do some group things, but one-on-one is the main thing. And they just cheer up that person. So Danny's there in the far right, and with her mother, who has dementia. She found she was not able to do the same things with her mother because of the mother-daughter relationship and what her mother's expectations of her and her expectations of her mother. But bringing in somebody else who was a comedian to work with her and be a little sassy with her is part of it. It's not taking things too seriously. It's not about laughing, ha ha ha. It's about just being with that person and joining them in their journey where they are. So Laughter on Call is a marvelous thing. So we're very pleased to have Danny part of our group. We've just begun adding musicians. Brian LeBlanc is another person you've interviewed who's a wonderful musician who has early onset Alzheimer's. And he's just a miracle to me in terms of musicians, because I cannot do anything musical, and he has both plays instruments and has a beautiful singing voice. So he's also an inspiration. So overall, we are a group that's trying to do all kinds of things. We want, as a group, to share the idea that there is still joy living with dementia, that after a diagnosis, you still can access your creativity, whatever that may mean for you. There are just loads of different ranges of things of possibilities for creativity. So we're still trying to figure out how to get the message out. We're talking a little bit about social media, but haven't done a lot. We're creating resource lists, and we're expanding our membership all the time to get other people, those living with dementia and those working with dementia in the arts, to be part of our group. And we also want to, as I'm doing here, call attention to the wonderful work of the members of the group. And then we're also trying to explore some new things. There's a thing called neuroaesthetics. It's a fairly new field, but it talks about how the brain craves beauty, that we look for beauty everywhere. And it's not just beauty visually, but beauty in relationships, kindness to other people, and beauty overall. And I love all of that. So that's part of it as well. So that's what we've been doing. And now you wanted me to talk about anything else about my business?
That was awesome. The part on humor, I think, if you can get people to laugh and just enjoy the moment, I think you've seen people that, excuse me, who are in the latter stages of dementia, who they'll put headsets on, and all of a sudden it takes them back to a time when they can remember. Well, I think it may be the same thing with humor. If you can get people to laugh, it takes them back to a time when things were good and, enjoyable. And it changes the whole perception of somebody when they're able to laugh at themselves. I know that you talked about the, people with dementia continuing to do what they like to do. I love to play golf, and I almost quit because I was having trouble remembering the scores and everything. Well, I adapted to it, and I don't drive anymore, but I still play golf. And it's funny because during those 3 hours, I guess it's because of what I'm able to do and focus, is I'm single-minded anymore. And so during that period of time, I am only thinking about golf. And I kind of block everything else out. And after it's over with, it's so enjoyable to just look back and, wow, for that period of time, I was normal, and be able to laugh and joke and just enjoy, I guess, enjoy the moment that so many people are missing that have that doom and gloom.
That's so true. And two things. One is that laughter brings oxygen to the brain, so you really do think more clearly when when you're laughing with somebody. So that's the fun aspect of it. The other is that it outlasts that laughter or the golfing, that those good feelings outlast the actual event, and that we are in a better mood for a while after that. So the more we can have those moments, the better it is for us overall during the day. It's a great thing to point out.
Okay, why don't you tell us a little bit about your company? And your company is called Wiser Now.
Yeah, I did. I called it Wiser Now. Initially, that was the newsletter that I wrote for. It was called Alzheimer's Tips for Caregivers, but it was called Wiser Now. That was the main thing, because you were going to be wiser after you read it, of course. And so, and then over the years, it just seemed better to use that as the name for my whole company, because it kind of covers a wide range of things. So I do a lot of. I describe my company as a training and publishing company. And in the training, I do staff development, mostly related to activity directors, activity professionals. Now they're called life enrichment directors. There's a lot of different names we use for these things. And so I do webinars for them. I do a lot of online courses. I work for other companies and produce materials for them. The other thing that I do is I publish a lot of material, and that is partly it's sometimes books, but it's a lot of times it's trivia quizzes, word games, and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I've done lately is create slideshows that are meant to be shown either one-on-one on an iPad. So they could be done individually on an iPad, or with, family member visiting, so you're kind of sharing it with a family member, or it can be done in a group setting on a large screen TV, which is really my preference. If you're doing it alone, you're just doing it alone. And I really designed all of these things so people would connect with one another, because connection is my primary goal in everything that I do. So I want you to make new brain connections, but most of all, I want you to make connections with other people. And I try to make my trivia quizzes. Sometimes I do ask questions that you wouldn't know the answer to. But most of the time I try to ask questions that it doesn't matter if you don't know the answer to it, and that you can have a discussion about it, and you can connect with the other people, like, isn't that interesting? I never knew that. And that way connect with them by having something that you can discuss. Because so many times when people are visiting in residential care settings, when family members come to visit, they have no idea what to say. And they say things like, what did you have for lunch? And the person has no idea what they had for lunch. And therefore probably didn't have lunch, and oh my gosh, they're not feeding me. And you get everything going awry that way. So I try to do things that are fun and that will prompt discussions and fun things. So I can share my screen again if you want me to, and show you the rest of these slides. So let me do that. So here's a trivia quiz. What's your flower IQ? And don't worry about the numbers, because they don't matter here. The poinsettia plant is highly toxic and can kill a person or pet that eats the leaves. That's pretty common belief. So is it true or false? Well, it's actually false. It's not recommended to eat the leaves, but the worst result is you probably get an upset stomach. So they're not nearly as poisonous as people think they are. Watering potted bulbs with gin or vodka will prevent the flowers from flopping over. These tall bulb things, true or false? The answer is true. And when it's true like that and very surprising, I do a third slide in which I explain it. So bulbs with the very long stems flop from the weight of the blossoms. So watering them with 7 parts water and 1 part 80 proof alcohol, such as gin, vodka, whiskey, or rum, stunts the growth of the stem and leaves so that the flowers don't require additional support. So yes, you might not want to waste your alcohol on those kinds of things, but you might find that it works. Another flower IQ thing. The world's largest flower is nearly 10 feet tall and smells like rotting meat. True or false? Now again, I try to do a lot of things with true or false, or sometimes multiple choice, but most of the time true or false kinds of things, because you have a 50% chance of getting it right. And that happens to be true. And it's the Sumatran Titan arum, also known as the corpse plant. It produces a huge green and burgundy calla lily-like flower, 7 to 10 feet tall, but its awful smell attracts the creatures that pollinate it. So that's real. Then I do things that are just meant to prompt discussion. So gardening requires lots of water, most of it in the form of perspiration. Have you found that that's true for you? And do you like gardening? And you can go off on a tangent that way. Or my rule of green thumb for mulch is to double my initial estimate of bags needed, add 3, and then I'll only be 2 bags short. Again, using a sense of humor about it, because we've all had to go back to the store to get more mulch. Gardening is cheaper than therapy, and you get tomatoes. So again, talking about the fun kinds of things that you can do with gardening and raising vegetables. And then you can go off on tangents about tomatoes off the vine or growing zucchini, and you can never get rid of all of the zucchini that you plant. There's always too much zucchini. So doing those kinds of things. The common thread through all of the things that I've shown you so far is that something special happens to my head when I'm near puzzles. That was said by Lillian, who was one of the artists that I've shown. And it's not just pencils, but whatever you do creatively. You talked about how time flowed for you, and that's what happens over and over again for people who are doing something that they love, and whatever that the arts may be, whatever it may be, in your case, golf, and for other people it might be another sport or some video game or whatever it might be, but getting time to flow. The other thing that you mentioned is that musicians often, after, if you play music that they like, they will suddenly become more articulate after you play that, because their brain has been awakened a little bit. And that's the other good thing, that the after effects are still there. So I want to put this slide up, which talks about all of the different things that I have mentioned here. And people can come back to this slide on the podcast then to access any of the information that they want to about the people that I've talked about who are doing all of these great things. So thank you for letting me do that, and let's stop sharing again.
Oh, that was awesome. You're an amazing lady. Anything, if somebody, this is the first video that they've seen since they've got diagnosed, what would you say to them?
There is still joy. I have a thing called the magic coloring book, and it's the when you open the first page, it's all blank, and that's what people feel like when they get the diagnosis, is my life is a blank, nothing matters anymore. And then you have to manipulate the tabs. But the second time you show it, it's all black and white, and that's the doom and gloom. People say, well, there's life, yeah, but it's all just duty and responsibility if you're the care partner. It's just dull and uninteresting if you are the person with disease. But the third time, if you manipulate the tabs correctly, it's all in bright color. Everything is colored in, and it's beautiful. And then that's what I want people to see, is that life is not over with a diagnosis. Life is just beginning a new chapter. And you still have access to creativity in whatever form you want, or joy in whatever form you want. It may not be your artistry, but it may be golf, or it may be just doing something you enjoy doing. And much of it, I'm a big believer in nature. So just taking a walk outdoors on a regular basis, getting outdoors, that automatically uplifts the mood. And it's why in my slideshows, I do a lot of things with nature. So gardening, and always try to show animals and nature kinds of things, because that also lifts people's spirits to do that. So anything you can do to lift your spirit, look for those things that bring you joy, and you will find you still have quite a life.
Thank you so much. Everything that you said is so impactful with people, after they get that initial diagnosis and the doom and gloom, and to know that there is light on the other side. There are people doing amazing things, and there's just incredible people that care for us, that have dementia, and are helping us along the way. So thank you so very much for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. My absolute pleasure, Chuck. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank Dementia Action Alliance for their support on behalf of This Dementia Life. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. You can see other podcasts on our website, daanow.org. Please, and press on podcast. Please join me to meet the most inspiring and amazing people on This Dementia Life. I'm your host, Chuck McClatchy, and remember, the brain may forget, but the heart remembers. See you next time on This Dementia Life.